Yep.
Okay, great. So welcome back. If you were joining us with Dr. Buckingham earlier, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for flying all the way here from Hawaii and joining us and giving this wonderful presentation. Thank you for your contributions to the field as well. And hi, Sophia. See you. And thank you for those that have joined us online. If you have questions, my understanding is you can write them in the chat and Dr. Amini will ask those for you. I also want to thank Dr. Amini for arranging this seminar for us and working on it with staff and all the behind the scenes people, because they oftentimes don't get much recognition. And I want to say how excited I am that when my former director, the woman who hired me here at the University of Michigan, came in to be here tonight for the presentation, Dr. Suzanne Seelig. I am so thrilled and grateful to you for giving me opportunity in my career path and for making it possible for me to take care of my elderly parents in the last few years while I was here.
Get anything that you didn't deserve.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. So I also want to say that when I looked at the registration, I saw such an array of professionals, students, faculty, staff that are joining us. So I put this together, and what I'm really trying to say is, you know, there are some who may have a great deal of expertise on this topic of bereavement. And then there are others who are just learning, or maybe you've had personal experience. And so some of my slides, some of my information might bore you, but just keep in mind that I'm trying to give just each one of you a little nugget to take away tonight.
Well, are you, I don't know if it's appropriate enough, but do you ever ask these students what experience that they've had with death?
Well, especially in the class that the department had me develop. It's called Wellness in the Face of Loss. So yes, of course, that's where we start with their own personal experiences. And what we do is we kind of go back to their first loss. And I have them do a little, what we call a lifeline. So starting from when they were born, and maybe they had a pet die, maybe they had, you know, a grandparent die, or perhaps they had a good friend die or a much more significant loss in their life. And so we start there and we look at how they coped, how they processed it. And many of them have an aha moment when they then learn about the theories of healthy coping and, you know, in bereavement. And they are able to not be so hard on themselves, because I think the most important thing is that we have compassion, not just for other bereaved people, but for ourselves when we're grieving a loss. So yes, we do. Yes. And I'm going to be putting a plug in all night for the course. It is going to be offered in winter of 2025. It's cross-listed, so both undergrads and grads can join. But if you'll see from this flyer, if you're interested, for those of you online, you can email me and I can send it to you. But it just tells us, it gives you a brief snapshot of what we do in the class. We build a toolkit, a self-care toolkit. And what I do is have you identify things like, you know, support, good support people. And, you know, what kind of support do they give to you? Do you have someone who will do something for you in a traumatic situation? Just, you know, without question, in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., that you can call. Do you have a good listener? Because listening is a huge part of helping someone through their grief and processing it. So, you know, all these various types of support that we need. And if students don't have them, and they will change throughout our life. So I encourage students to look at that toolkit regularly and see what's in there. There are tools for healthy coping with grief, and look at the support people. And, you know, people come in and out of our lives. Maybe your best friend now isn't going to be there in 10 years locally for you to rely on. So that personal toolkit becomes really important. And we design that. It's the final project. We also look at, all the modern, theories. We take a brief overview of grief, history as well. So it's a great class. I love it, of course. And I hope to use my new book. Still waiting for that approval and supplement it with some really wonderful scholarly work that's out there.
I have another quick question, if
Yeah.
I may. It occurs to me that the kind of training and exposure that your students would get in terms of that toolkit, be really interested to know to what extent were they able to use that at some point in their lives to help other people through grief and.
Right, and that's a great point, because many of the students that are taking this course are in our healthcare, they're going to be
Right.
future healthcare workers in various professions. And so once they learn how to equip themselves with their own tools, then the beauty is that they can now know how to help patients and clients and all the people.
But family, other families and friends as well.
Right, absolutely, yeah. We talk about how, patients, for example, will come to PT and they may be experiencing some loss that they can't regain a part of their mobility. And so they oftentimes want to be talking to this person in front of them who can be more objective, perhaps, right? That's what we've learned. And so I think that, it's really important for themselves to look at their own losses, because oftentimes, to be honest with you, when we're working in bereavement support groups, or many counselor friends that I have in bereavement, often say, we have to go back to that first significant loss or somewhere in there, because perhaps that's a part of this. I mean, with each loss, it comes back up, right?
Mhm.
And so if you haven't really learned to process some things that happened previously in a loss, that can be affecting the current loss, right? I had a woman in research study, she had lost her husband, and I saw her 1 year, because that was part of the criteria, 1 year out, and she was very distraught, in her late 50s, and she said, I'm really bothered that I can't handle this loss, because we were so prepared for it. My husband prepared me. We knew it was coming. He was dying of cancer, pancreatic cancer, another painful type of cancer. And she said, it really bothers me. And, here I am, I may have to make clear, I'm not a counselor, I'm a sociologist, I'm, a researcher, that type of thing. But of course, through IRB, I have to have the proper, resources to give the people in front of me. So I remember her just being so bothered by that I felt like we were not going to get too far in the rest of the interview. And so I just said to her, well, have you had some other great significant loss in your life and she just immediately just froze. She looked very distraught again, and she said, that's it. That's what it is. And she, in another country, had been forced to have an abortion and could not breathe. They did not allow it. They said, no, that didn't happen, no crying. So she had to, I sent her, of course, to a professional bereavement counselor, and she had to really work with that piece to really come back to then being able to process what had just happened with her husband, because it was something she hadn't told him. Yeah. So unlike my seasoned colleague, I have notes, so you'll see me referring to my notes a lot. There's just so much. When I get excited about a presentation because there's so much I want to give in a short amount of time. So I write some things down. We'll see how well I do. I get off track pretty fast. Did you have the clicker? Is this? Yeah, thank you.
Right there.
And it's not working. Okay. IT to the rescue.
Yeah.
Right.
Good. Right.
There we go. So the learning objectives I'm tasked with for tonight is to understand the definitions and components of healthy grieving. I could start with the word bereave. That means to be robbed. We're actually robbed of something. dispelling myths and misconceptions about how we process grief and loss, exploring how it impacts us, identifying how we support systems, and examining styles of grief and recognizing warning signs for complicated grief. So that's a tall task. I'll do my best. I just love this quote by C.S. Lewis. I go to it often. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. And if you don't read any other book about grief, read this small book. He lost his wife, and it's just very interesting take on and very raw emotions that he's able to communicate in this little grief observe. But then again, it's our job as bereavement counselors or people who work in the field, researchers, to kind of shift the perspective if we can a little bit here. Because we don't want to be afraid all the time. That's not healthy for us, right? Just as you do with the dying, you have to help them out there. So I like to ask, what is your grief teaching you? So this is that whole transformation. Is this experience going to transform me? Am I going to be able to use this to help another person? What is this all about? And oftentimes that's a really tough question to ask someone in their initial bereavement, right? I mean, we're so consumed with that clash of emotions, we can't possibly think about, this is teaching me something? Well, I don't really want it to. I want my person back, right? But later on, I think it's really important that we do a lot of self-reflection. Grieving is very social. I am a sociologist. I see, the norms in culture and the expectations and all of that, which can be good or bad. And so a lot of times, we forget that we have to self-reflect in those painful, quiet times. So we talk about that for the toolkit, in putting together a toolkit that allows for you to have some quiet time practices. I have many of them myself to get through my family's losses and just cope with life, really. Quiet time practices, whether it's meditation, prayer, yoga, those types of things. And then eventually asking yourself, has this grief experience taught me anything? Has it taught me, about my values, about my belief system? What have I learned? And personally, I like to say that, I have a whole list of what grief has taught me, and it varies with each individual I've lost. But I think it's taught me certainly to value my relationships more and to live more in the moment, because you learn to cherish life. Oftentimes, I'm sure you get this a lot too. Why would you want to study such a depressing topic? It's so, I've had students say, well, are you into goth? Or, no, I try to avoid wearing black as much as possible because, she studies death too. And I have one brother who's the humorist in our family who calls me Dr. Death. And I just have to let it go, But I think it's really important to look at and self-reflect on what each of these grief experiences have taught us. And so for me, and again, back to, getting this question, why do you do it? Well, it's very life affirming to work in end of life and around just some of the most fabulous people I have encountered. I worked at a funeral home for a year. I love that job more than any job because they just lived life fully. And of course, there was a lot of gallows humor, not around the family, not around the body ever, but just to cope. They had a lot of gallows humor. And that experience showed me their humanness in they took care of the families before they died, during the death, and after, with support provided. It was just really an incredible experience. And I did that as an internship while I was earning the PhD. So, but I tell students, it's very life affirming to study and in this field, and to know that your life's going to come to an end, like you said. you know, we're not gonna be assumed into heaven, you know, or anyplace else. We're all going to die. And we explore that again. I'm going to push for this class all through this presentation. We explore that. I've had students say, what would it be like? How would we live our lives if we came in with an expiration date? Interesting. We're born a certain day. We're gonna live so many years. Would we live our lives differently? Of course we would. Depending on if we had 40 years or 90 years, it's going to be different, right? But some really great questions come up in that class. So I encourage you to think about enrolling in that. So some of the healthy components for coping with grief after significant loss. I talked about the self-care, the quiet time practices. There are so many apps that you have available to you to help you do this. And I hope you will really take care of yourself, not just in times of processing grief, but at all times, because we live in such a busy, busy world. The social support and that connection, to know that we have someone, you know, with families today being dispersed geographically. I mean, it used to be that we all worked in the same town, we hung out with family, you know, I can remember, I'm that old, not quite as.
That's right. Thank you.
I mean, when
Yeah.
you said 1973, you were getting your grant,
Right.
graduating from Beecher High
I
School.
know.
down the road here.
That's right.
But, you know, now I lost track. Geographically, so back in the 50s and 60s, so we all lived in close proximity. Now, people's children are in different countries working. Or, you know, so it's smaller. Our ability for good family support is smaller. Caregiving is going to be a problem with the boomers because many of our kids aren't around us, right? So yeah, it's getting smaller. So we have to look at that. That's really an important component. And if we don't have it, we need to create it before we're in these circumstances. Try to create it. Try to think about that. I personally have younger friends because I'm so afraid all my friends are going to die off, because that's what I hear from people in their, you know, advanced age is that, oh gosh, all my friends are going, and that's such a lonely time. So I'm making sure I have, you know, some younger friends, including those my age. But and then in some circumstances, in some significant losses, there's a reconstructing of a new identity that's really important to recognize and to cope with. And when I wrote my research study on this, on spousal loss, and I studied support groups, I noticed that they weren't addressing that many of the participants in these support groups for widows and widowers, they were addressing all emotion. It was all emotion. And there was very little about, you know, oh, the temporal aspects of identity. So you've got the past. Oh, I was Mrs. John Smith. Well, who am I now? I'm a widow? I don't even like that term, you know. So I hear this a lot. So they're looking at their past, they're looking at their present identity, who am I now? And they're looking at their future identity. What is the road ahead for me? And that all needs to be worked through with memories that they've had. So they need, again, a good support system to help them. Maybe someone who knew their husband is going to be helpful with the past identity that they had, right? So that is not true of all losses, but it can be true of certain ones, and especially if there was a lot of caregiving. This person now goes from, you know, full caregiving to zero, and they have to reconstruct who they are. Am I still this person's daughter or mother? You know, no, I mean, yes, but no, I don't have the care. So we've got to reconstruct who we are. And that takes a lot of work and a good support system. Constructing and sharing the story of the person who died. And I'm going to tell you more about that. It's called meaning-making theory in a couple of slides ahead. But this is so important. And not everyone does it with words. You can construct your story by painting, poetry, writing poems, journaling. You know, sometimes words are too painful to speak. and some people don't want to go to a support group or to a grief counselor. And so they have to say, you know, we have to help them learn that, you know, but you like to draw, you like art, maybe you could paint your pain. And they do. It's amazing. They have entire conferences and all these creative ways to express your story. But that story is super important. It helps you. We find ourselves after we've lost someone very significant, thinking a lot about how much of our life is going to change, right? And so we need to construct that story, integrating that person's good qualities and traits into our life narrative. And that's what Dr. Robert Niemeyer does in his theory, and I'm going to talk about that. And then creating a new bond with the deceased. And this might sound a little bizarre at first when you think about it, for some of you, but when the physical body dies, our love doesn't stop, and we don't know what to do with it. And that's part of why grief is so hard, because we've got all this love and pain and yearning to talk one more time, to see them one more time, to hear them one more time, to have them open that door and come in. And they don't, and they're not going to. And we realize this. It takes a while sometimes. So what do we do with all this? Well, we help people to construct a new bond. There's an entire theory on this, connecting bonds theory. And we used to do that a lot by going to the cemetery. I don't see many people going to the cemetery anymore. I don't know if your families go. I still go. I love it. It's peaceful. I always take my students, not in this class because it's an online class, but I'm trying to work on getting it hybrid or, you know, face-to-face, because the previous university I was at, and I taught the sociology of death and dying, grief and bereavement, and we went to a cemetery physically. I gave them the option if it was going to be too hard. One did opt out of the cemetery. One did opt out of going to a funeral home. He said, I can't. I said, that's okay. I'll give you another assignment. But I think we need, like you were saying, Buck, you know, this whole death denying society. That's part of why, you know, partly why they don't want it in the curriculum. Because, you know, we deny it. We sequester death and grief. I teased public health at the health fair. I came to join them and to have my table with my book on grief, and it was way down there, and the rest of them were all, I get it. I know they were trying to be kind and put me by the bookstore to sell more books, but I said, oh, okay. You don't want to be by the death and grief. You want to sequester me. But I moved that up. We were okay. But I do think that's part of why, you know, it's not just that they, you know, we use the medical model, you know, we want to give this to get you through. It's also that we're still a death denying society. We can fix everything in the 21st century. We just Google it, right? We can fix it all. We can't. And that's the reality check we need to have, because it helps us to live a fuller life. Okay. So I don't think I'll show this little clip, but I do want you to look up the giraffe in quicksand as an example. So as Dr. Buckingham talked about Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she was phenomenal. She opened so many doors for us in this field. Her work was absolutely wonderful, but she interviewed the dying. So this model fits dying people, and it's still being used today in many circles. DABDA, these are the 5 stages. I'm sure many of you have heard it. We hear it still in the news. You can Google it and it'll still come up that it's, you know, if you Google it for the stages of grief. But it was misapplied, and it's really hard to undo something so big, because you will see some of these in bereaved people. Not in a linear fashion, and she didn't mean for this to be linear. In fact, when she was dying, she said, there's a lot more to this dying than 5 stages. But if you're grieving someone you lost, what are you bargaining? There's no bargaining that I'm aware of. So it really doesn't apply, and yet we can't seem to get it to a place where we need to. Another term that's used a lot that is not appropriate is closure. And you'll hear this from the news media. I used to get right up off the couch in pain saying, stop using closure. That person just lost their son. He was murdered. They'll never have closure. They will grieve to the day they died. Now, they may have justice from a court case, or maybe a more sense of peace over some decision that was made, or more information that they got, but closure. There's an entire book written on it. Can't think of who wrote it. It's called the End of Closure, or The Myth of Closure. It's excellent. Maybe it'll come to me. But it's really important that we recognize that people, when they lose a child especially, it goes against the natural order of life. And so we shouldn't expect so much out of them. Okay, I'm going to give you a really brief overview of the significant contributions. I guess, you know, when I put all these up, you're going to be overwhelmed, so I just did a couple at a time. But I guess my point here is in telling you, as students especially, there's a lot to learn about grief and death and dying. And so way back to Freud and Lindemann's work, it was all about breaking that bond, breaking that attachment. They thought, well, you know, that's their problem. They're still attached to that person who died. They've got all this love and they're still attached. And yet it wasn't going well for people. They were still yearning and searching and struggling like crazy. And so we advanced the work thanks to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and John Bowlby's work of the 50s and 60s in attachment theory, the stage model for dying, misapplied, obviously. So if you
I'm glad you brought that up. It's
Yeah.
excellent, because people use those 5 stages of grief, and it's absolutely wrong.
right, Yeah.
And it's not meant to be applied to grief.
yeah,
The
and
myth of closure,
yes,
Pauline Boss, right?
Yes, Pauline Boss, she's wonderful. She also wrote on ambiguous loss, and I'll talk a little bit about that. As we
Right,
move on.
that's in here as well. Yeah.
Yes, ambiguous loss. And then we move into, as we learn more and observe and research more, we learn about Colin Murray Parks and Bowlby's work in the 60s and 70s on the 4 stages of grief. If you want more, I've got it. I could bore you all night long. And then William Warden, who died last year, phenomenal work on the task of mourning, really great guy. Teresa Brando extended his task of mourning, expanded the task into 6 processes similar to his, but stretched it a little more. And then I'm going to talk about Strobe and Schutz's dual process model we use a lot, as well as Robert Niemeyer's meaning making. Okay, and these are just, again, some of the ones I've mentioned, other than the styles of grief by Dr. Ken Doka. Okay, so I always like to stand on the giants' shoulders. So I show them in my classes because these are phenomenal people who have devoted their lives to this work. And I have had the pleasure of meeting all but one. I haven't met Phyllis Silverman. And the 4 towards the end are still alive. Dr. Warden, as I said, died last year. But just really phenomenal people. Strobe, and she had a partner who did a lot of the research with her. I couldn't find a picture of him, so I'm sorry. but just really, I just had dinner with Dr. Doka in Nova Scotia. I was privileged to be invited to an international work group. I'm sure you're familiar with them. Yeah, just great people. And Dr. Doka was there, and I sat with him, and I really keep trying to get him to make some more videos. You know, I need better quality videos for my students. I probably should just interview him. That's what I'm going to
Bill
do.
Warden Bill started the
The
IWG
IWG.
back in the 70s.
Oh, well, I'm a candidate for,
Bill
you know,
Warden started,
I'm
and Colbert
hopeful.
Parks was our first speaker.
Calamari Parks?
Was our first speaker.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, well, we can talk later, but yeah, I wasn't too sure about the whole group until I got invited, and then I said, oh, Nova Scotia, okay, I'll join UNC. And they've just been phenomenal. Stephen Connor,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so see if I can catch up in my notes here for you.
I don't think you need your notes.
You know, well, I want to do justice to their work. So, by the way, William Warden was a psychologist, so we have a really wonderful multidisciplinary group of people studying grief and bereavement. So he developed this framework, as pointed out in the diagram here. So accepting the reality of the loss, he said, initially, though you intellectually know that you lost someone you loved, you may experience disbelief for some time. So integrating the reality of their death involves fully acknowledging it with your entire being. For instance, this realization might hit you when you make arrangements with the funeral home or attend the memorial or collect their ashes, their remains. Later, during occasions they would have been part of that future life, the reality resurfaces and emphasizes their absence, which gives you that ability to accept the reality of the loss. But for some, as I said, you know, when you lose a child, that's such a huge torment
When I,
to process.
Laurel,
Yeah.
when you lose a child, I've always said in my lectures, when you lose a parent, you've lost your past.
Oh, yeah.
When you lose a child, you've lost your future.
Yeah. And we don't prepare for that. I mean, as I said, you know, it goes against the natural law. So secondly, he says processing the pain of grief. So this means, you know, really leaning into the emotion that you experience. It's really important not to dismiss it. And most of the time we can't do that, you know. I mean, we have 3 days bereavement leave, most of us, and we got to go back in and we got to manage those emotions all day long. And I tell people that I work with, go to your car, have a good cry. Find someone at work you can take a walk with that'll just be quiet and just let you walk with them. You need that. It's very, very taxing on your body. The body keeps the score. You know, the book. It's very stressful to be in that, you know, managing those emotions constantly and pretending as if you're good. And we have a tendency to do that a lot. And then adjusting to the world without the deceased in it. External adjustments involve taking on new responsibilities, and sometimes that means acquiring new skills. So internally, you adapt to your changed identity and your self-concept. And spiritually, you grapple with questions about belief systems, about life's purpose and meaning. And then lastly, Dr. Warden noted that we need to find an enduring connection with them. There's that connecting bond. Gradually, you strike a balance between remembering the person who passed away and living a meaningful life. This task involves creating a connection that endures as you embark on your new life path. He says to remember that grief is a unique journey for each individual, and these tasks provide a framework for understanding and navigating that journey. So we have to have somewhat of a guideline or framework in order to help people that eventually, you know, come to us with complicated grief. Oh, and one of my favorites, dual process model. So Strobe and her partner, Hank Shute, offer a unique perspective on how individuals cope when they are bereaved. Unlike traditional linear grief models, this theory recognizes that healthy grieving involves an oscillation between 2 essential processes. So this oscillation is really, really important. And in the loss-oriented part of we're doing what they call grief work. we're going through the memories, of who we lost. We're dealing with the emotions. There's an intrusion of grief, letting go. I wrote a paper, holding on and letting go. It's something that we need to learn to do. And denial, restoration changes. So for example, reflecting on shared experiences, visiting the grave, or attending memorial services. And then there are the restoration-oriented stressors. This is where individuals shift their attention away from grief, which is healthy, and focus on adapting to their life changes that were caused by the loss. So you just think of a spouse who, you know, the one they lost did all the, you know, lawn service and all the financials, you know, took care of all the bills or the garbage or, you know, all those chores, right? Although I know we often today have couples with more gender neutral assigned tasks, you'll be surprised at what the other one did, that now you have to maybe learn a new skill. I remember interviewing this one widower who said, "You don't mind if I fold the clothes, the laundry while you're interviewing me?" And I said, "No, of course not." He said, "I can't keep up." He was raising 2 teenagers. His wife died suddenly. And he said, I never had to do the wash. My mother and sisters did it. And my wife did it. And now I have to do it because my 2 sons don't know how. And he was just frantic. It was just, this was bothering him more than anything. And yet when he'd go to the support group, all they dealt with was emotion. You know, how are you feeling? What are you dealing with? Are you angry? So we've got to restructure some of these support groups to incorporate these other stressors that people deal with. It was very interesting to me. I got invited to a man-only support group. And of course, I was the researcher. I wasn't interviewing them. I was observing them. And I sat in the corner, and the gal that was running the grief support, she came in and she gave them this is what you do tonight, you know, and she laughed. And there was probably about 8 or 9 guys, and they all sat there looking, and then all of a sudden they started talking about ball games and you know, all kinds of things, everything but their loss and their grief. And you know what? They did just fine. They said to me afterwards, "We're connecting, we're all in pain. What good does it do to talk about it?" There's that, you know, difference there that I'll get to. But the instructor or the grief support facilitator came in, you know, just before she came in, they read, "Oh, we're supposed to do this and this and this," and they quickly talked about it, like 2 minutes. And you know what? If they're coming there, they're getting something. They keep coming back every week. So, but this is really healthy, this dual process model, so that we remind people they need to get some respite from their grief. They need to go and do, and sometimes they get stuck in the emotion. And, you know, it's okay if you do for a while, but you gotta be able to recognize it, or have a good support system that recognizes that we gotta get you over here. We gotta oscillate you over to doing, maybe taking on even a new hobby at some point. Getting you a part-time job if you can. There's a lot of grief cognitive fog, so a lot of people aren't able to do that if it's a significant loss. But nonetheless, we need to be able to recognize and support someone to, you know, that gets pretty stuck in the emotion, or you know, can't get out of the bed and not taking care of themselves. So, and here's another one of my favorites. This is Dr. Robert Niemeyer, who came up with the meaning-making model. And he's a prominent grief expert. He's contributed a great deal to the field. And this model focuses on how individuals actively construct new narratives and find purpose after experiencing a very significant loss. So he talks about, well, at the core of his model is the idea that grieving involves actively engaging in constructing a new narrative. So we have, this is our life now, and oftentimes people will start the story with, well, you know, with the illness of the spouse or someone they lost, and the death story, and not the life story of that person. So we have to try to help them. But their whole life is taking on a new. We lost it all? Oh, uh-oh.
Major loss,
Closing time?
major loss, right?
Closing time?
No, I didn't.
I'm glad we have a calm presence for our director. Okay. And the online people didn't
Yeah,
disappear?
No. Yeah.
Okay, they're good. And will it connect here?
Yeah.
Is that,
Okay, good. So, so the life story of the person you lost is now bit by bit, piece by piece, as you think about and breathe through the memories of what you had with them. Their life story can be integrated into your new, going forward, your new narrative, right? Because oftentimes people will say, well, before my wife died, or before my daughter died, you know, and that's usually, this is the line. I mean, there was a totally different life then, and now going forward, this is what we have. So, he talks about integrating the past, present, and future, as well as the transformation of pain. His model encourages viewing grief as that transformative process that I was talking about. But I do want to point out that we shouldn't, if we're helping someone who's bereaved, we shouldn't, especially in the initial bereavement, expect them to know that this could teach you something. This could transform you. I mean, especially if it's, you know, a child or your spouse of 40 years old, your life partner, your beloved pet. I mean, you know, oh, well, you know, dogs die, right? And, you know, let it teach you something, and you can help other pet owners. We really have to be careful, especially when we're helping a person who's lost a child in particular. And I'm going to read you a little excerpt. This is the book I wrote, Grief-Stricken Stories of Altered Loss in a Pandemic Haze. I started writing it after we experienced 4 huge losses in my family in 2020 during the pandemic, one as a result of COVID. So our rituals were changed and altered, and so was our grief. And I felt helpless as the grief scholar in the family because everyone has this significant grief. I love them very much. That some are out of state. You know, how do I help my family? And Sophia, I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't call you out, and I just did, ask a wonderful question about how do you organize that grief when you have this multiple loss? And I'll let you share if you care to about yours. But that was a great reflection for me because I think I organized it by writing, through writing about them and giving my family members. I kept saying, they need to tell the story, but they couldn't go to a support group. And many of them didn't want to go to a grief counselor. And, you know, we're all faced with our own mortality. We don't know what's going to happen next, right? We don't know. Are the vaccines going to work? Are we going to need more? You know, you lived through it with me. So we had a lot. And another thing is that some of us didn't have who we thought we were going to have to help us through our grief. When my mother died, who was, by the way, my best friend, my North Star, and she was phenomenal, had her mind right to the end, 91. And I mean, I remember when I saw the terminal decline, because I was part of the caregiving. I remember saying, not to her, not now, Mom. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I feared having to put her somewhere if she fell, or, you know, if I couldn't be with her. How cruel of a death is that? And how many people have we lost in the pandemic? And I'm telling you, we have a public health crisis with bereavement. People just really are, I think it's contributing to the loneliness factor that our US Surgeon General talked about. He said we have an epidemic of loneliness. But anyway, back to supporting someone who's had a very significant loss, not thinking that, you know, we have to talk right away about, well, you know, your grief taught you something, obviously it's teaching you something. No, that's a long ways away from the initial bereavement, right? And I just want to read a little excerpt. So I wrote this book, as I said, my niece died in February of 2020, just weeks before the world fell apart, really. We were blessed to be there. We all got on a plane and went out. She was 34 years old, Anna. And little did we know that we wouldn't be able to support them in the traditional way. You know, I thought I'd be back in Colorado within weeks. We weren't, and we couldn't. And, you know, there was little support, and they had no family there. And I'm very close to my brother and his wife. And so it was a very, very challenging time to go through that. And so, as I said, you know, and then after that, my cousin, who's like a sister to me, lost her husband of Lewy body dementia, which had been horrible. And that was in the middle of the pandemic. So we had to make different arrangements. And then my mom dies. And then I started to reflect on with you, some people aren't always there for you. 3 weeks after my mom died, my husband lost his only brother to COVID. And it was 3 weeks. And he, you know, he was rushed to the hospital on his birthday. We couldn't go be there. We had to text him as he's dying. It was awful. And so I had always thought, I'm okay when my mom dies because I got my husband. And 3 weeks after she died, I have never seen him so distraught that he couldn't be there for his brother or his brother's family, who were texting us and calling us, and so distraught that he was gone at 62 years old. So I couldn't count on my husband. So a lot of bereaved people during that time who had significant loss, the person they thought was going to be able to be there for them might be grieving someone else significant. I found that out firsthand. Anyway, so I pulled together this. I don't know how when I look at it, because there was a lot going on. I was juggling work here and trying to help my family, but I just was driven to write this book. I thought there are so many people going through similar circumstances, and I can use it in my class, hopefully. And so I asked my family members if they would like to share their story, because I kept thinking, they got to share their story. And they can't do it in the traditional way. And so I dedicated this to them, the brave, bereaved family members who, in the depths of pain, said, of course, I want the world to know what my daughter was like. And so my sister-in-law, I just want, in terms of thinking about transformation, just want to read this little excerpt. When I was writing this one chapter, actually, I entitled it Emptiness, Surrender. No, that's all. Here we go. Transition, Transformation, Perspective. Because it does shift your perspective once you can arrive there at seeing some value in the lesson, the life lesson. But here's what she said after losing her 34-year-old daughter in an instant in the emergency room. I wish I could see a future where I can carry the weight of losing my soulmate, my best friend, my child, and transform it into loving memory instead of crushing sadness. So we have to be careful with expecting people to learn from their grief, especially in these kinds of circumstances. There's a lot more excerpts, but I wanted to show that one. So back to Dr. Niemeyer. I guess in summary, his model invites us to construct purposeful narratives. He says we are homo narrans, storytelling humans. It recognizes this model that meaning making is an active process that contributes to our healing and growth. I kind of shy away from healing. I know my colleagues kind of go, what? It's all about healing. And I think it medicalizes the bereavement experience. I'm not so sure as a sociologist you know, we don't want to medicalize something. I mean, grief is a natural life experience we're all going to have if we care to love someone. So why do we say healing and recovery? Those seem like they medicalize it to me. Something to think about. And this is Phyllis Silverman on the continuing bonds theory. She developed along with other colleagues, Klaas and Nickman. It challenges the traditional notion of closure and emphasizes that grieving individuals can maintain a connection with their deceased loved ones, even as they adapt to a changed life, rather than severing the ties, as we once thought from Freud and others. This theory recognizes that memories, legacies, and shared experiences continue to shape our lives, allowing us to find comfort and connection in various ways. Some examples might be to, I personally wear my mother's jewelry sometimes, like I am tonight. I feel a special connection with her through the jewelry. And of course, there's always a story. I remember, I have to tell you real quick, how are we doing on time? Oh, there we go. That's why I have notes, because I keep telling too many stories in my presentations. But I remember this day so clearly, and I was putting these on tonight. And after my dad died, Mom said, I never liked that bedspread he picked out and those curtains. Can you take me shopping? And I said, sure, Mom. I said, when I get home from work, I will take you to JCPenney or wherever you need to go to pick out some things for the bedroom, because she wanted to her will, right? Okay, we can do that. So I got home and she was all dolled up and she had all this real gold jewelry on, and I thought, maybe we should go to dinner. I don't know. She just needed to get out. You know, she's in the condominium too much. So I said, wow, you look great. And she said, thank you. And I said, but I don't know if you should wear those earrings because they don't have a clip or a clasp. And those are your good earrings. I shouldn't have said that, I know, but I did because I was concerned. And she said, no, I'm wearing them. And I said, okay. And she came and she got in the car and we went and she picked out, it was exhausting for her, but we managed to get it. And on the way home, I looked at her and I looked again, I said, Mom, you're missing an earring. And she said, oh no, you were right. I shouldn't have worn my good earrings. So we went back to JCPenney. We went through she stayed in the car, went through the dressing room. I looked everywhere. Darn. And I get back to the car and she says, yeah, and I was going to leave them to you because they're your birthstone. I said, I know. I love those earrings. I said, it's okay. It's just an earring. Inside, I'm thinking, darn. And so we get home and I'm helping her with her little walker and we go to get in the back door through the garage and there's the shiny earring laying on. She said, look. So she went inside and she put them in an envelope. That makes my heart sad a little. She put them in an envelope. She said, I'm never wearing these again. And she wrote my name on. I said, oh no, I feel terrible. But I wear them with great stories to tell, right? So sometimes we connect the bond through objects, tangible objects. I know that there are a lot of students I've had in my classes that have their cremains of someone or a thumbprint. They call them thumbies, and they'll make them for you at the funeral home. Some religious beliefs don't believe in scattering the cremains, so they can't divide them or throw them or do anything that would be considered not sacred in that belief system. So, but the fingerprint is okay. So they will wear this jewelry as a connection, a feeling of strength. Any other ideas about how to connect a bond with someone? Have you ever seen when you're driving on the expressway or anywhere, you'll see some memorial, it looks like the gravesite on the back of the windshield, and they'll have the birth date and the death. Have you seen that? It started out west, actually. Yeah, really cool. A lot of people will do memorial tattoos, young people. I just love asking people, like in a restaurant, my server, oh, can you tell me about the tattoo? And what I find really interesting is they don't talk about the death. It's a totally different narrative. Talk about the life. Oh yeah, this is a memory of my sister. she and I were very close, blah, 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 blah. They talk about the light. It's very interesting to me. Okay, any questions? I'm kind of going awful fast here. How long do I have, Lisa? Half an hour? What's that? Okay. No questions from my online crew? Oh, okay.
Laura, I have a question, if I may. The idea of, the tattoos sort of capturing the story,
Mhm.
is that something historically or in different cultures that has been, an issue, or how do you say, practice? Where people would do, sort of body piercings or body markings or something like henna, or, to capture the memory of another person.
I'm not really sure. Do you know, Dr. Buckingham?
I know that in the Hawaiian culture, living there for years, in Hawaii, the Hawaiians will do more tattoos. They'll also do the thing what you said in the back of their pickup truck, large
Oh, yeah,
pickup trucks in
yeah.
Hawaii,
Yeah.
something in the window.
I always look at that and think, what's gonna
Yeah.
happen when that truck stops,
Yeah.
dies itself?
Right.
Oh, you're gonna get a new one, I hope, or, I don't know.
No, and so at the Hawaiian culture, it's done a lot. And in Africa, not so much. In East Africa, where I work in Tanzania, we don't have that. But in Hawaiian culture, the Asian cultures, the Indo-Asian cultures will have a lot of that. We have a lot of Tongans, people from Tonga,
Right.
that they build the stone walls in Hawaii.
Mhm.
The Tongans will do this often. It's about half of them will have a memorial tattoo. So we see it more in Micronesia, Hawaii.
Have you heard of the thumbprinting?
Yeah,
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 I've never heard of
yeah.
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Okay, good question. So Dr. Kendoka again, love his work. So he talks about the styles of grieving. So, I just had someone, I think it was Dr. Amini, ask me at the health fair, do men and women grieve differently? And we would think they do, right? I mean, but the reality is we're trying to get away from that gender, assigned to gender. Because I'm telling you, in my research, I interviewed women that never shed a tear, and they said, my family thinks something's wrong with me because I don't cry about him. Well, what's there to cry about? I've never been a crier. And then I've had men sit in front of me that cried the whole time, entire time, and would say, I can't seem to, can you give me some tips on how to stop crying everywhere I go? I go to church and we sing the music that we sang together and it reminds me of her. I go in my car and I turn on the radio and there's a song that reminds me of her. Everything I do, she's not there. And I cry constantly all day long. And this was a year out. And he had been to 6 support groups. And he wasn't feeling like the big question, does anyone know what the biggest question a bereaved person struggles with? I know you do. Yes, Sophia? No? Okay. Anyone want to guess?
How long is it gonna last?
That's number 2. That's a big one. How long is this going to last? How am I going to feel this way? Number 1 question is, am I going crazy? They're so afraid because we have this clash of emotion all the time. It's not just anger, but, usually it's a number of things together. And sadly, that's ironic, I use the word sadly, it's sadness, it has been taken away from us. Now it's depression. Oh, they must be depressed. It's almost like, and there's a whole book on this too. The field of psychiatry is taking it away. Like you can't be sad for a while. Well, someone died, I'm gonna be sad. And that's another thing I like to tell the students about because there's this big move. Now, bear with me because you might not like what you hear first. There's this big move to celebrate the life. And that's great. I'm all for it. But we also have to mourn the death because the reality is we're very sad. I mean, most generally, we're sad. So, you know, but again, the death denying society says, oh, we're not gonna be sad. We're gonna celebrate life. We're gonna have a celebration. That's what they would want. They don't want you to be sad. Oh, you are. And people have to hide that then. I remember the last university I worked at, coming into work and everyone was so distraught looking and I said, what happened? And they told me about this colleague in his 30s, was a new dad, and he died of a heart attack the night before. And they were just all like, you know, stunned. And they said, oh my gosh, you know, this is unbelievable. And so I was working at the Center for, you know, to advance the study of loss. And so I get to my office and here's an email already from HR with a note from the family. And I kid you not, they prescribed our grieving. They said, we are in shock. We know you loved him. We're gonna have a celebration of life. We don't want any tears. And I'm reading this going, this is gonna be a mistake, a huge mistake, and it was. You wanna know why? Because everyone was extremely shocked and saddened and crying. He was a wonderful colleague, fun guy. And he's a new dad, and you know, we're supposed to just go and pretend like we're gonna celebrate all that and pretend he didn't die. No, we were very sad. And as a result of that email, I think, many people didn't go because they were afraid of making the family sadder. You can't make them sadder by your crying, but they didn't want it. So they prescribed our grief. And this is a problem that we have. Okay, so back to,
Can't you do both at the same time?
yes, you must.
I mean, like, if
Celebrate
that's what the family
and
wanted to
grieve.
do, and if it was the way that they were dealing with it, you
Yes.
could still go and be supportive of the family and be,
I just think we're moving into this, we're gonna go in a theater someday and see, this is the life of, you know, there's gonna be, I mean, where's the body at some of these, have you been to a funeral where there's no body? Sometimes no cremains. You're not even at your own funeral. So I think this is problematic for people in their bereavement because then they realize, you know, I mean, when you go to these funerals and memorials, the rituals and the, you know, the music, that helps you get the sadness up and out. And that's why people are crying, because they're remembering he loved this song, you know? So that's really, really good to think about. I think we need to do both, celebrate the life and mourn the death. Styles of grieving. So typically men don't like to talk a lot, and they're not, you know, they're told from early on, don't be a crybaby. I had 5 brothers, so, you know, my dad was very stoic, and my mother wasn't a crier either, really. And typically women like to talk through things, right? Agree? Talk therapy and talk about everything. You gotta go over it 600 times, right? And that's why it's mostly women in support groups, because they have a need to talk and construct the story the way they do. And the men talk about other things. But so typically that's what we think, but it's a continuum. He calls them intuitive grievers, the ones that have all the emotion to express and the talking, or and then there's the instrumental griever. And you could be somewhere on the continuum, or you can go from one extreme to the next all the time. But what I learned when I worked in hospice is when I came into the room, I was to look for the people who were not in high emotion. And there were always, you know, a couple family members at the time, and work with them first, as opposed to the, you know, all the emotion. But so intuitive, they're expressing it more, whereas instrumental, they may have to get another job, work 2 jobs, start a foundation, those types of things. They're still grieving, and that's the important part here, is that don't think they're not grieving just because they're not crying, or they're not angry. You know, they're still grieving, but we shouldn't really do the men and women. We should, yeah. And I think you alluded to this, that I'm going to talk about anticipatory grief. So we deal a lot with that in hospice. They're anticipating, they're sort of rehearsing what's coming. And yet there are still families that are in such shock and disbelief. They'll say things that like are months out. They'll say, well, I don't know how I'm gonna be here in July, and this is December, but you know, I don't know how I'm gonna do this in July, as I've got a big conference coming up and I have to give a talk. You know, and you're just like, oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, ancestral grief was brought up by Colin Murray Parks.
Yes,
He was the first one that talked about ancestral grief.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I had the pleasure of meeting him.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
So they're facing some kind of loss, they're anticipating. And, you know, this can be true in many different cases, but I'm gonna wait and talk about ambiguous grief first. Ambiguous grief is when it's unclear, unresolved. So perhaps you're, you know, taking care of someone with dementia and you're losing them and you see it and you know it. You're losing them a little each day. So it's really, you're grieving that person. You're saying goodbye to them in a way. Think about the people, the families whose members couldn't be found in this recent bridge tragedy. You know, how do you grieve someone when you don't know where the body is? Maybe you're thinking, maybe, you know, maybe there's somebody rescued them and, you know, we're gonna learn about this. I mean, it's unlikely, right? But if it were your family member, you might be coming up with all kinds of scenarios. So you're grieving this ambiguous loss. There's the disenfranchised grief, when society itself doesn't recognize or validate your loss. So, for example, you divorced your husband and 10 years later he dies, you had 2 children with him, you go to the funeral for your children, but you're not gonna get the recognition and acknowledgement that the other wife's gonna get. So you're sort of disenfranchised, right? And this occurs a lot. Sometimes with suicide, people will feel that their grief is disenfranchised. A lot of stigma. And then there's complicated grief, which is prolonged, intense grief, where they don't oscillate. They can't, they get stuck. And we've recently made it a disorder. It's now in the DSM-5, prolonged grief disorder. A lot has been written about that. But basically it's when, you know, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not attending to your, you know, daily needs, you're eating, you're cleaning your body, all of those types of things. You know, you just get stuck in this hole and it's hard to get out. So you need those good support people to recognize it and get you to the professional. The good news is this is not a big proportion of bereaved people that end up in this complicated grief. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
No, I think it's true. It oftentimes, you know, complicated grief is a minority, but it exists and it's real. We see it manifested through some psychiatric issues, obviously, depression, and we see there. I mean, even Colin Murray Parks talked about grief, and he talked about, as you said, anticipatory grief. But he talked about prolonged grief too, and he thought that those are the people who needed serious.
Yes, yes, help
Yeah.
beyond what we can
Yeah,
give them,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, and there's that course again that I keep pushing on. Well, what course is that? Wellness in the face of loss.
You know,
AG
Laurel,
379.
I like to say something. I think
Yeah.
this is wonderful, and I'm excited to go off of this course. I would love to see every nursing student
Absolutely.
take this class,
Mhm.
okay, or any, you know, all our health students.
Yes,
This is an important part, and I don't know if anything we can do to promote this with the pre-nursing students and some of the nursing students. You know, I think it is very important.
many of the directors are having me come into their course
Yeah,
and talk to their students,
Right.
which has been phenomenal.
right.
And they're very interested. And, you know, it's so important on so many levels because when we had the pandemic, you know, many of the medical professionals, you know, they couldn't deal with it. They're carrying those stories
Right.
still today.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
And they felt like they failed. They said, you know, the news is making us heroes. Everybody's calling us heroes, but we carry these stories in this grief, and it's awful. And if it happens again, I'm out of healthcare.
Right.
And that's gonna really be tough for all of us. If we see, you know, I mean, we already can't keep up, in this healthcare system here in the US. So, yeah, you can email me for more information, the online people, if you want, more information on that. I don't know, can we enroll, people outside of, student status,
If
like,
they take it as an elective, it's enroll who?
like community people or lifelong student? No?
I
As a
don't know,
lifelong-
I don't know what the mechanism is now.
I don't think it's open.
Right.
Well, this is my little
Yeah.
try,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah, that'd be
No.
good.
yeah,
I'm delighted you're doing it.
yeah,
But you could propose it to some of the professional associations and have it for continuing education credit,
right,
right? I mean, like the nurses have opportunities. If the nurses really respond well when they're in class, I would talk to people in that department or in that school now to manage the CE classes.
good suggestion. So there's that, US Surgeon General quote, in the context of loneliness, we can't underestimate the power that we have as individuals to provide the support that people need, to provide that transition from a place of pain to a place of possibility. And I have to wonder how many of these people that are, you know, lonely are dealing with loss. That, I mean, when I come together with my international groups, a couple of times a year, I mean, we're all overwhelmed at how many services are being offered and how many people are feeling so hopeless in their grief. We've never seen it like this before. And a lot of it is because our grief is altered. And it's much more challenging, to think about not being there for someone you love. Even though it was out of our control, was, you know, I mean, everyone has regrets. I don't care how perfect the death is. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Everyone has regrets. My mother couldn't have had a better death in her home with all of us around her, singing, praying with her, holding her hand. Even my sister's dog was, she liked. And yet, after she was gone, I remember crying my heart out and saying, I should have gotten that bed more often. There's always something that we're going to regret. But these people from,
The sins of commission, the
yes,
things we don't do, are
yes,
oftentimes more damaging to us than the sins we do.
absolutely. I was blessed to have a social work cousin who said, oh, but you got in the bed with her.
Right, right, yeah.
Just savor that. Yeah. But there's always regret, no matter how perfect it is. So yeah, I think we really need to draw more attention from a public health perspective, and I'll show you at the end a little bit of research. I've got it if you want to take it for late night reading, Suzanne. Because there's a lot of people in public health now starting to come on board, and they developed a bereavement model because as you talked about, you know, prevention. I probably should let you guys discuss it, the last few slides here. I think I will. Oh, there it is, public health model. So either one of you want to talk about, you know, the key components of public health, identifying risk, preventing, given the protective factors, and this is what they're doing. So a lot of people fit into this low risk category. As we said, majority of individuals deal with grief with support from their family and friends, typically. A lot of that didn't happen because of COVID. Moderate risk category, they're in need of some additional support, like a grief support group, volunteer-led group, and then there's the high risk, developing complicated grief with prolonged grief disorder that may need referral. So this is typically what the numbers were when this model was developed. And I'm sorry this slide's so busy, I couldn't change it. It wouldn't let me because I cut and pasted the whole diagram. So there was some research in 2015, who needs bereavement support? A population-based survey of bereavement risk and support need. And these are,
Three questions.
Oh, three questions. Okay, then maybe, should I not go into this? Okay. I can pause, let's go for the questions.
Okay, the first question is, how do you identify complicated grief? Is it different from depression?
Yeah, the assessment for that is pretty complex.
Yeah, I'm gonna say a few
Okay.
things. Can you hear me? Can I go? And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Colin Murray Parks, as well as Bill Wharton at the International Work Group
Mhm.
in 1978 on grief, thought that the complicated grief is the most difficult to work with. But Bill Wharton said, there's two kinds of grief that we see, depression we see depression, and then we see what he called, and this is what Dr. Wharton said, not me, situational depression.
Situational, yes,
And,
yes.
and when you're dealing with a situation and you're having depression from the situation, it's called, and
Right.
Bill brought it up at the IWG, International Work Group on Grief,
Mhm.
that you see this, and this is not complicated grief.
Right, and so we have to distinguish that.
Right,
And there are assessment tools for
exactly
professionals
right.
to determine that. But, again, back to this, taking, the discourse in society is, if you're sad, you're depressed. No, if you're sad that someone died, give the person some compassion and time
The
to work
science in
through
that
that.
question, people can be perceived as called situational depression, but it's
Yeah.
not depression,
Right.
it's sadness.
Right, it's normal sadness
Normal,
as a response to a death
Right.
of someone we love.
Right.
Absolutely. Good question. What else do you have for me,
Okay.
for us?
Can you repeat that, because I cannot turn on my microphone here, it creates an echo. Could you please repeat the question?
Yes.
As I'm reading, because online people may not
Okay.
hear that. Is there a certain time frame that would indicate complicated grief? I know everyone grieves differently and the different cases, but are there milestones?
Are there
Milestones.
milestones? Okay, so the question was, are there certain
Time frame.
timeframes that can be applied to determine complicated grief? Is that?
But, yeah.
Yeah, so, well, again, I think we have to look at the death itself. What were the factors in the death? If we're talking suicide, there's so much more to work through, so much, guilt and regret, and we might not have all the answers. We might never have all the answers. So, trying to look at the complex factors in the death, is it a child? People are gonna need more time to grieve. And so I think, again, it has to do with our values in this culture of, fix everything, let's get through this, come on, live forward. Well, that's a little hard to do when you're trying to, carry all this different emotion around. So I think that, it's hard to say there's a time frame because it depends on the factors. If it's a person that's lived a long life, of course, I was very close to my mother but she lived 91 years and, so for me to have complicated grief over that, no, I am grieving her, and the loss of her, but it's very different if you lose your mother and you're in the prime of your life and she's not gonna be there for your wedding and all the milestones. And so, there's more potential, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Depending on the factors of the death or the illness, as well as the person who's grieving, whether or not they have a history of depression and, an inability to cope well. So that's gonna play in there too.
I have a question.
Mhm.
How, I'm sure there've been studies on this, but how religion, and beliefs in terms of, the afterlife play into these processes, because, I mean, I've heard people say so often, you know, they're in a better place now. And I mean, does that ameliorate somehow?
No, that's really, it's,
Breathing?
it's
very
something we
common.
put on the do not say list.
But it's very, I mean,
It's very common.
but for the person who's suffering the loss,
Mhm.
then they say it about
Oh.
their.
Oh,
loved one.
sometimes they do. They,
Yeah, I know.
yes, they've picked up that, from, yeah. And if they have a belief system that tells them they're in a better place,
Right,
then that's gonna be helpful to them.
right, that's what I'm saying.
Right,
I would
right.
never, you never. say
Right,
this to
no, I
somebody
know,
else.
yeah, yeah, but, you know, there are books written on the things not to say,
Yeah.
you know, just a silent, non-anxious presence is all that bereaved people need. My students always say, oh, I don't know what to say, what is the
Okay.
perfect thing to say? You know, it's not so much about what you say, it's just showing up. Showing up, maybe showing up to their house and doing what needs to be done, shovel the driveway, get the groceries, you know, get the wood in for a fire, whatever. Sounds like I'm living in the past, but, you know what I mean? It's like being there and doing things without having some special formulated, you know, paragraph of words, that you say to them, because, you know, it's just your presence that's gonna really help them cope better. Or saying, I'm here for you, and then be there, show up, like you said, you know, people need you there. Okay, another question?
Three more questions and one comment. What are your thoughts to people who distance from a person who is dying or with progressing dementia because they do not want to remember that person that way, or tell their family to do the same?
Okay, I didn't hear a part of that, so what about a person with dementia and you're caregiving for them and you're grieving their loss?
Distancing from them and tell other people to do the same because you do not-
Distancing from them?
Yeah,
Oh.
because you do not want to remember them that way.
Okay,
In that end of the stage of dementia, they're very difficult situations, right?
mhm.
So I assume the question is, when you do not want to see your loved person in that situation of dementia, you distance from that.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of coping too, especially if you're a caregiver. You're gonna distance a little bit, and you're gonna wanna focus on who they used to be. And I encourage people in those roles to journal if they can, so they don't forget who that person was. And I had a friend recently, and she's suffering from dementia, she's my age, and, she's in hospice. And she said, I said to her, is there anything more I can do? Is there anything you want me to do? And she said, yes, if I go, either my mind or my body or both, please let my children know how much I loved them. And I said to her, I want you to write a letter to all your children. While you can, now do it. So I think it's just part of, even the person who has dementia is feeling all this, you know, from the caregivers, from the family, that they are disappearing, or, you know, they're very much in tune with, you know, at the beginning of this illness, they're getting the diagnosis, you know, they're watching, they're reading cues of people that are visiting. They don't want, but they're the person with the dementia. So I guess for the carer and the people that are trying to distance, it's really hard to be there in this hard part of life, but we have to. You know, we just have to. And some are better at it than others. I know some people in my family cannot be there with the dying person. They cannot do it. They'd rather pace the hall and, you know, just give me an update. That's okay. Go do something else, you know? Go talk to your brother that can't do it either. Some of us can't be there in the hard part. But we need to be for them, for the person with dementia. Someone has to be. And I would say it's okay if you distance a little, but write some memories down. to sustain you during that time, because that person is not really all of that. They are a piece of that, and we don't know what's ahead, if that makes sense. Buck, did you want to add anything?
No.
Okay.
So the next question is, I struggle with fleeting moments of lightness in the face of profound grief that lead people to think I'm past it. They don't realize that within minutes, something can trigger
Oh,
me
yeah.
to fall down into a hole of darkness that I can't escape.
Yeah, do you want me to repeat all that?
No,
Okay.
I think that
Okay,
I tried to talk about.
yeah, okay, so yeah, that's very common, is that, you know, we can get up and in the morning and, yeah, it feels like I'm gonna be good today, right? And then you get to work and you interact, and then, you know, people know you've experienced a significant loss, and then suddenly something reminds you, and you're just in a hole, and you're just sobbing, or you need to, again, I say, go do it. And the importance of, you know, this is why I'm such an advocate for grief literacy, because we have a culture that just is not comfortable with knowing what to do to support people. And so I encourage that person that's asking that question or talking about those moments to find people who understand grief, who understand that, and maybe it's someone, you know, you trust in you see daily or regularly, and you can say to them, hey, I go all over the place, and I guess it's pretty common, it is. And just explain to them, help them get some education on the grief journey of losing whoever they lost. You know, I mean, I talk with pet owners who just feel like it's just ridiculous for them to be grieving this pet the way they are, but they are. And so there's a lot of stigma with that for them. And, you know, I say, you shared life with this animal every day. Your routine was feeding them, taking them for walks. It's like they are a part of our family. So until our culture catches up, though, it's really hard for people. You know, I've encountered this a lot. I think we need pet loss support groups. We probably already have them. But we certainly have pet loss cemeteries, and, you know, a lot of people are putting the cremains in containers that look like their dog, and they're taking them home, and they're very attached, very attached. Yeah.
So the last question, and there is a comment, I don't know if the person wants me to read it or not, but the question is, how do I explain these seemingly sudden mood shifts?
Because that's grief. There's just a clash. It just clashes.
Messy.
It's just messy. Yes, thank you. Messy and chaotic. You know, it's not linear. It's a lot. And so how do you explain giving birth and all that happens in a birth? That's like asking me, you know, I mean, how do you deal with all that adrenaline and excitement? And then what happens if the baby dies? You know, you got all that. So it's really hard to say, you know, predict why this happens, but we are creatures that have all these emotions, and they clash a lot when we're in pain and suffering and yearning for someone that we didn't think we were going to lose, or we didn't want to lose. I mean, we never want to lose anyone we love, right? So good question.
Yeah.
Hard to answer. If you can do a better job, Dr. Buckingham.
No,
They don't have answers.
So, you know, I write about that in the book a little bit. Sometimes we have to sit with not knowing. That's hard, but we do. And it's that self-reflection that helps us along the grief journey. You can go ahead and read. I'm sure as long as you don't identify the person, you said there was a comment.
Oh, I don't think they were in parentheses.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Question, would you provide the religious belief and grief? How often the healthcare providers collaborate with the church and their groups as their social support?
Well, that's interesting. if I'm understanding what they're looking for. You know, as a sociologist, again, we look at the structure of society and how much it's changed. Okay, so religion, God used to be the authority. Now the self is the authority. And when, you know, I mean, for most people, we have moved to the self being the authority. And so when you do that, I think that changes your life experiences. We also have to look at our values. We highly value individualism, right? And so what happens then when we need people? I mean, individualism is one of our biggest values here in the US, and autonomy, but have you ever seen anyone die without anyone? I mean, at least, I mean, in COVID, we had strangers with people, but autonomy is a little overrated. I think we need each other. I don't know if I'm going in that direction, but I see this shift. You know, I saw a report not too long ago where a quarter of the participants in the study said they have no affiliation with religion or religious organizations. A fourth of the whole, and it was a huge study. It was like thousands of US participants. So, you know, people may still be spiritual, they may still believe in a God, but I don't know. Am I answering the question or am I just?
I think so, yeah. I think that there are some, I think there is this connection between the healthcare providers, the social support, and the religious belief of the person who has lost. So how these are connected together.
I think what you're trying to say, I think is true. For a lot of people, if religion is important to a lot of people, then the religious beliefs will help them through the grief experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and it will help them.
And we need to respect that.
And-
It's cultural competence,
And
right?
if
It's
the
part of it.
person that has not, if the person does not have any deep religious experience, may believe in God, but it's also how they deal with grief, is how they look at their life and how they look at life.
Values, yeah.
How do you look at life, and how do you look at your life relationship to what's around you, and
Right.
how do you project yourself through life itself?
Mhm.
That's going to define a lot about how you're going to handle grief, is
Yeah.
how you look at life.
Yes.
And we've talked about that in these IWG meetings all the time.
Yes, and you know, some people believe that those who believe in an afterlife may do better with grief.
Yeah.
And to some extent, they may, but I've met just as many
But not-
people who don't,
Right.
that do just fine.
And I've met people who believe, who have not done fine.
Right,
So there's no secret key
yeah,
to.
there's no map to grief and no
Exactly.
guideline
There's
and,
no secret.
No
Yeah.
impenetrable.
but there is a really big spiritual component to grief. You know, it helps us ask the bigger questions. What am I here for? What is life about? What, you know, am I a spiritual being? What, you know, it deepens our faith for some, in whatever that faith is. And for some, depending on the factors in the death, you know, homicide, suicide, for some, it may not be comforting. So that's why we have to be culturally competent people working in these professions. Not just culturally, but, you know, to understand people and respect their beliefs, their spiritual beliefs, their religious beliefs, if they have any. And that's why it's so important to know who you're, you know, supporting, right? So, another question? No, good.
I have a comment. Years ago, decades ago, I was trying to prompt my best friend, who's a nurse, to include questions about people's religion when they did their assessments and when they were working with them. He said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "We are forbidden to ask anybody about their religious beliefs." And that was, I would say, in the neighborhood of like 40 years ago, okay? And now it's standard practice. And it's recognized, right, that you don't have to believe in what that person believes in,
Right.
but you have to demonstrate an interest in what they believe in and be supportive of them in their belief.
Right.
And that's a really, really big, major change.
Yes, absolutely. You know, it reminds me of my research study where I interviewed 38 widows and widowers, baby boomers. I wanted to look at spousal loss before they were old. I mean, it's expected, I mean, you know, these boomers were, you know, 46 to 64. So, I put that into my demographics and I asked them the question. I didn't know what it was gonna produce, but I'm glad I did, because every one of them, without skipping a beat, when I said, do you have a religious or spiritual affiliation? Every one of them identified either a faith or a non-believer, atheist, Catholic, Protestant, without skipping a beat. So then we do the interview, right? Only one of those 38 people mentioned a religious figure during the death story that they construct, the grief and death story they constructed for me. So I began to notice that, and so I asked, you know, did you said you were Catholic, did you ever call you priest? Because again, back when God was the authority in the 50s and 60s, and that's day and age, it was about the soul. It was all about the soul of the person who was dying. We lined the bedrooms with candles, waiting for the priest to come and do the last rites. Fast forward, you got kids saying, "No, I don't want to have a funeral mass for, you know, that's too long. I don't want to sit through that." Even though that person practiced. And today, you know, we just have different rituals, different, even in the same faith. But it was interesting to me, this just one woman mentioned calling her pastor in those 38 people. And yet when I brought it to them, so it supports the medicalization of dying. Because when they're dying and they practice a faith and you're not calling the priest or the pastor or the rabbi, we're not concerned with the soul. We're concerned with pain and all the medical. Just putting it out there. Sophia, you had a question?
I did have a question. I can explain more of who I am, but my question is, after dealing with multiple losses, when another person, a family friend, someone you know, when another person passes away, how can you get out of that mindset of, this is another person that passed away, it's adding to the numbers, and that disappointment of the amount that you've lost, and instead focus on the person and the situation individually?
You have to take my class. You asked such great
She
questions.
could teach your class.
She could teach it. Well, and I want to acknowledge you had multiple loss. You don't have to discuss it, but I know that. And so that is why you asked me such a fabulous question in the class that I'm teaching now about how do you organize all that when you have, you know, and how do you give a fair share of grieving to each one of those individuals? It was a really good question. As far as now you have another loss and how do you're saying, how do I support that person without looking at it as, oh no, another loss, it's going to trigger all my losses. Is that what I'm hearing?
Like, instead of focusing on, like, it's more like the disappointment in the numbers. And just like, oh, this is like number 9 or number 10, or like even losing track of all just like the family friends on top of like the close people. And instead focus on like the actual person and the actual experience.
Well, you know, I think the fact that you can ask that question means you are not going to, you're going to do what you know needs to be done. You're going to support them because you have already reflected on, you don't want that to be the way you want to support whoever had this loss. And you want to be fully present and non-anxious. And I think you will do that because you've already got this, you know, this self-reflection going on. How you do it without, you know, triggering all your other losses? Well, I think because they're so new, you're probably going to, I think the best thing for you is, and you already know this, I know you know this, is not to compare your losses with this person who's grieving now. Not to say, oh, I know it's, you know, gloom and doom. I've had 4 or 5 losses and, you know, that's probably gonna happen now to you. You know better. You know that you just have to be present to them and support them and be there. And know that, yes, you're gonna experience probably some grief, during that time you're supporting them. But as long as you know, it's okay to cry with them. I mean, they don't have to know you're crying because of your loss, right? And knowing that you can't make them sadder, they're already, that is the biggest concern students have. I'm so afraid I'm gonna mess up and make them sadder. No, they're already sad. Just be there. I hope that helped.
Yes, thank you.
Anyone else?
I have kind of a comment to follow up on that. It's kind of like, emotions don't have limits. So just like I think that some people have an unlimited capacity, a limitless capacity to love. Just because you love one person doesn't mean that you can't love multiple people.
Right.
And I think a grief is like that as well. That, you could lose 10 people in your life, and every grief experience, every loss feels differently. And just because you've grieved over one person doesn't mean that you're not going to have, but that next person doesn't make it their fair share of your grief, right? I mean, funny way of putting it. It's not like a zero-sum game. I mean, I just think we have, as humans, most of us have the capacity, whether we recognize it or not, to have these sort of unlimited supply of emotions. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we had multiple losses. And if you notice a bunch carefully, Anderson Cooper just had a thing on grief. And he used my book on coping with grief and loss. And Wolf Blitzer asked Anderson, what can he say when he's interviewing someone? Wolf Blitzer has one saying. He always say these 4 words or 5 words. May his or her blessing be, and may the memory of him be a blessing. Wolf Blitzer says those words all the time. May his memory be a blessing. This is what he said. And he says it all the time. If you watch CNN and watch Wolf Blitzer, this is what it is. May his or her memory always be a blessing. He ends with that. And it's about the memory of the person you have that you lost. That's going to help you deal with future losses. Because you know what? The older we get, the more people we're going to lose around us. And that's the way it is. That's why how you look at your life and what you want to do, how we look at our lives and what we want to do, it really dictates a lot what our grief reaction will be.
That reminds me of an assignment I do in the death class.
Yeah.
Not this one, but I can somehow figure it out. I have them write their own obituary.
Yeah.
The only criteria is that they cannot die young. And I mean, sounds a little weird, right? Write your obituary. They loved it. They said they wrote 2 pages. They talked about their children. They named their children. They talked about where they went to school and what they contributed.
What you gotta do, let me help you with this next class. I was with my students at Yale, I would say, today you're gonna fill out your death certificate.
Oh.
And I bring in the state of Connecticut death certificate, and I would have the student fill out their own death certificate. And then the students freak out. They're like, what? What's your name?
Yeah.
Where did you die? What did you die of? And how old were you when you died?
Oh.
And so when students have to do this, the thing about their own death, it's really what I call PDA. That's personal death awareness. And that's the first step.
Absolutely.
If you could look at a piece of paper, I would bring the form in. This is kind of the death certificate. This is you, fill it out. And they were like, what?
Yeah,
So
that would be hard.
I get
Yeah.
the state of Michigan death certificate
Mhm.
and bring it to your class
Oh, boy.
and have them fill out the death certificate.
I don't know. The obituary, they loved writing it.
Yeah.
I had one gal turn it in and I looked at the picture. She had a picture, her obituary picture. And it looked just like her, only she was 95. I said, is this like your great aunt? And she said, no, I put it into computer software.
Yeah.
And she lived to 95 and she died on a beach in Tahiti.
Yeah, yeah.
They really got into this.
Yeah.
They lived long lives.
Yeah.
They contributed.
That's most people think.
Well, of course. That's the Hollywood version.
Unfortunate thing, because when I
Yeah.
took the death certificate, I took the mean age was like 91. And you guys, let me tell you right now, this is not, you guys not gonna die, he's 91. That's
And
with the
more
class, there's
questions.
30 students in the class.
Yes,
and
there's
he's
one more
91.
question. We're gonna
Okay.
make this our last question.
Yeah,
Yeah, there
Okay.
is a lot of anger and resentment in my family about certain people not showing up to support a dying loved one for help with caregiving over the last 6 months.
it's tough.
Any suggestion? We used to be close, but now it is awkward.
This is what I said earlier, is that dying for nothing is a coming apart issue. This is not uncommon. This is a common occurrence with families. It pulls families apart. Someone gets mad at someone, says, you didn't do something, I didn't bring the flowers, or they didn't come to a service or whatever, and it just pulls things.
And this becomes really problematic in people's
Yeah.
bereavement. It's just they're beating themselves up because how could he do that?
Yeah.
And why did she do that? And, you know, a lot of times people, again, are in this high emotion when someone's dying or they
Yeah.
just died, and they make mistakes. They need to know their place in the family, first of all. And many people can't even get a grip because they got all these emotions going on, clashing, and, you know, they can't figure out how to bring them together, so it tears them apart. And they make mistakes and they destroy lifelong relationships. My advice is there may be a cool down period for a few years even. We hate to do that, but sometimes reconciliation is not going to happen because of the severity of what happened during that period of time. But I would just say, stay open to repair and, you know, forgiveness if forgiveness is needed. Now, who was it that said true forgiveness is saying, thank you for that experience? Not always easy, but I think it was Oprah actually that said that. But it does, it happens in way too many families. And I think that, you know, it's just because grief is so chaotic and we don't know how to kind of, you know, sometimes people will take charge of everything, the possessions, because they're trying to get the grief together. And that's how they do it. They step out of line in families, they do all kinds of terrible things. It's rare that you hear that a family went through without any rifts. And, you know, it's sad. I think there needs to be more research into it and more strategies to develop to help families in this period of time because, you know, family is important to all of us. All right, well, thank you.
Thank
all.
you,
Right?
Laurel.
A little nugget, I did, I learned.
Good.
So,
Was
thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, great, and thank you to the
Wonderful.
people online, wherever they are.
A
No, is this the camera?
hearing.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank
All
you.
right, I didn't get to the very end.
And Reza, thanks so much
Yeah.
for all your work.
We have death and grief for them.